Hi, everybody. This is a slideshow about incorporating research into your paper. So, the prior slideshow I gave regarding research was how to actually find research in the TCC library. This slideshow is all about how to cite the research properly and incorporate it as you begin writing the draft of your paper or continue writing the draft of your paper. So you need to balance four things as you put research into your paper. And I'm just going to go over these four things quickly. Direct quotes and paraphrased ideas from your two primary source texts. In other words, your two short stories or your short story and play. All of this is considered evidence. And then number two is your own analysis of those quotes and ideas, which is called analysis or explanation. You already did this, numbers 1 and 2, in your paper over A Raisin in the Sun. You incorporated evidence and you analyzed that evidence. Now that you're using research, you'll have two more things to incorporate into your paragraphs. Direct quotes and paraphrased or summarized ideas from the research you find. So that is evidence from the sources. And then number 4 is your own analysis of the source evidence, so the quotes or ideas you find from the sources. And that is called analysis or explanation. So essentially 1 and 3 are the same thing, and 2 and 4 are the same thing. You're still finding evidence, but instead of just evidence and analysis from primary sources, which is the imaginative literature, you're adding evidence and analysis from the research you find. There is an acronym called ICE, which, if you remember ICE, ICE, you should be able to think about how it refers to the integration of quotes into your material. So ICE, as you can see, stands for Introduce, Cite, Explain. Never introduce a quote or paraphrase abruptly into your writing without first briefly introducing it, citing it, and then explaining it. So it's often referred to as ICE. Again, I for introduce, C for cite, and E for explain. So let's start with introduce. When introducing your quote, you will provide the context of the quote as well as who said it. You will use what is called a signal phrase to introduce the quote. Let me circle the word signal phrase because that's important. The signal phrase will have a signal verb that indicates a particular writer's words are coming up next in your paper. And I've just given you a chart here of signal verbs that are often used when you're talking about and introducing research. Things like argues, suggests, thinks, presents, claims, etc. So you can come back to this chart anytime you want and find verbs that you can use when you're incorporating your research and when you're creating a signal phrase to introduce your research. And then this is a continuation of the introduce slide or idea. The following phrases are signal phrases. So I gave you the verbs first, and now here are the phrases that you could use to introduce. There are many more. These are common ones, and you can always come back again and look at these and use these in your paper. You could also call them templates for introducing quotes, where X is the name of the author who wrote the quote. So, as X observes, and then you have the quote from the research. According to literary critic X, X, a professor of English, maintains. In her book, one writer asserts that. And you see that continues on this way. If we go back to the prior slide and think about the verbs that are used here, verbs like observes, maintains, asserts, argues, those are all on that chart, and there are many others as well. So this is the introduction part of the ICE. So now we have cite. Directly after your signal phrase, at the end of the sentence, okay? So you have a sentence, you have a quote. Before you go to step 4 from the very beginning of this slide, which is analyzing the quote or analyzing the evidence, you will use parentheses to enclose the author's last name only and page number. And here are a few rules about that. If you have included the author's name in the signal phrase, you do not need the author's name a second time. So you don't need it in the parentheses. If you cannot find any page numbers in your article, which is common when you're researching online articles, you don't need to put a fake page number there. You can just leave it blank. And so, ultimately, if you have put the author's name in the signal phrase and have no page number, there will be no need for parentheses after the sentence. So let me show you a few examples and talk about them a little bit. So this first example, X states in her article, and then there's the quote, and X is the name of the author. So X here is in the sentence. X is in the sentence, and therefore all we need is page number. We don't need X's name again in the parentheses. So you can see that happens in most of these examples. Again, these are just a few examples. Now let's go down to the 5th one. In her book, one writer asserts that. And notice that in choosing to write this way, in choosing to start the sentence saying one writer asserts, you have the author's last name in the parentheses here because it is not in the sentence. So I'll write that again. X in parentheses because it's not in the sentence. Signal phrase. So, once again, if the signal phrase has the author's name, you don't need to write it again in the parentheses. If the signal phrase you've chosen to write does not have the author's name, then you do have to put it in parentheses. That is the proper citation. Not only quotation marks if you've quoted it directly. Of course, quotation marks you have to quote word for word. And I have another slideshow coming up on that. But then you have the page number if you can find the page number. Okay, moving on. And then finally we have explain. So we have the E part. After the quote, you must explain the significance of the quote. How might it relate to your thesis and topic sentence? What interpretation of the quote do you have? Does the quote support your argument? Why? As the writer, it is your responsibility to interpret the quote for your readers and provide the significance. That explanation does not have to be lengthy. The explanation can be 1 or 2 sentences. And that's fine because we're writing a relatively short paper. You're not covering these 2 stories in a huge amount of depth, in enough depth to be able to explain why you've chosen this particular research. Okay, and so my last slide is actually a paragraph with research that follows this ICE format. And this paragraph is in our book, in the sample research paper that is in the back of our book. It's in text to text, back of book, where they have one sample research paper, and that's this one. And this research paper is about a poem, and it's about a poem called Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. So I'm going to read through this paragraph with you and show you and point out to you as we go the different elements of the paragraph as we go. Okay, so this is a paragraph that includes research. And let me read the first sentence. Dickinson's narrator does not fear death, perhaps because death is associated here not so much with endings or divine judgment, but instead with a very human journey. So that is her topic sentence of this paragraph. We know that the paragraph is going to be death as a human journey. The driver seems affable, kindly stopping and driving slowly. That is evidence from poem. In stanza 2, the narrator puts her work away to observe the driver calmly. That's more evidence from poem. It may seem unlikely that she would be trusting of so ominous a character. That little phrase right there in this particular paragraph is enough explanation. So E for the explanation part. The explanation of the poem. Number 2 in that list of 4 at the very beginning of this slide. So let me read that again. It may seem unlikely that she would be trusting of so ominous a character. But as critic Betsy Urquilla explains, Death himself comes courting as an aristocratic gentleman with horses and carriage. So, as Betsy Urquilla explains, that is the I part, introduce. Here's the cite, okay, the page number, because the author's name is in the sentence. David Barker carries this one step further, noting, quote, how homely and comfortable is this ride, and comparing it to a mild 19th century date. So, introduce. He carries this one step further. And then here's the citing. Notice with David Barker, there's no page number because the article likely was found online where there are no page numbers. So we have 2 critics actually here, both being introduced and cited together in order to support the ideas from the topic sentence. And then finally, here's the explanation of the research. Indeed, the fact that the carriage driver has stopped for the narrator on a day when she was too busy to do the same emphasizes his courtesy and thoughtfulness as a character. This is an original and deeply humanistic perception of death, in which the personified entity is neither a black-coated grim reaper nor a stern servant of God. So I'm going to call this evidence from research. So in this short paragraph, this paragraph is about 6 or 7 sentences long, which if you remember from my very first slideshow over writing a literary analysis essay, which you should continue to go back to, of course, I said that normal length paragraphs are 5 to 8 sentences. And so in this normal length paragraph, this author has done everything right, has written a good topic sentence that goes back to the thesis, has included evidence and analysis from both the poem and the research, and has used the ICE format, introduce by using a signal phrase, cite, and then explain. So that's all. I know this one was a little long, but I hope it helped you think about how to integrate the quotes into your paper. Bye-bye.